Hello everyone. Right, I'm just waiting for Sunday's video to upload. I've just finished that off and I'm really happy with what I've created. So that's why my fingers look as if I've been digging the garden. But I want to continue with this month's theme of recycle, repurpose and reuse that we're doing for the Facebook group, Nina Ribena's Art Journal Prompts and more. Oh gosh, when you sort through your stash, it just makes you realise how many things that you start off and you discard them and then, you know, you forget that you've got them. I have got 4 sheets of mixed media paper that I've got here. I did these for a video hop, gosh, well over a year ago with Shell C and I think Marg or Shelley, I think, was in the video hop as well. And we were making a cover or a page in a book that was being made into a journal, and I just loved it so much. And because I was fairly new to it at the time as well, I kept practicing, and so I ended up with 4 sheets of covers or pages for a book, and they've just sat there in my stash. I've done nothing with them, so I've decided that I'm going to turn these into something, and I will leave the link to the video showing how I created similar backgrounds to these, similar pages to these. I'll leave that in the description box below. But I just want to turn these into some journals that, you know, I can either use myself or give away in Happy Mail. I've got a birthday for a friend coming up, so, you know, I thought maybe she'd like one of these. But what I have been doing is I've been folding some mixed media paper. Let me just grab the book, bear with me a second. Faber-Castell pages that I'm using. This is a mixed media pad. It has 30 sheets of A4 paper and it's 250 GSM paper, so it's nice and thick. And to be honest, I buy whatever mixed media paper is on offer in Hobbycraft, which is a big craft store that we have here in the UK. It's probably the equivalent to your Hobby Lobby, and they're usually about £4 for a pad, so very reasonable. And I think that I can fit 4 sheets of mixed media paper into these books without it getting too bulky. So 4 sheets will give me 16 sides. So 4 sheets folded in half is 8, and then of course they're double-sided, so 16 sides for somebody to work on. And the way that I've done it, so I've just in fact I opened up the spirals and took the pages out just so that I didn't crease them, and then I've just cut the spiral edge off with my paper trimmer. I keep all the spirals because I like to make embellishments with those. You've seen me do that before. And then I'm folding it over, and let me just show you how I do this so that it's all nice and neat. I fold it over like that. I'm working on the back of one of my larger mixed media pads. Then I take a bone folder, but I put a piece of paper over the top of it first, just so that any marks that you're going to get or any debris that's on your bone folder will go on your piece of protective paper and not on your sheet. So there we go. That is my insert for one of these journals. And what I shall do, because of course they're thick, you sort of end up with sort of uneven edges. So I shall grab my craft mat and a craft knife, and I shall just cut that edge off. And so I'm slicing those uneven edges off, and you can see that I've held my signature down with a couple of bulldog clips just to keep the mixed media paper in place before I use a utility knife and a metal ruler to get those nice even edges. I'm working on a self-healing cutting mat too, so that I don't ruin my table underneath. Okay, so I've added my signature to the books. They're just going to be 1 signature per book, and I've trimmed everything down, and these just fit nice and snugly. Now be careful, do not chop your finger off like I tried to do. Now just to give you some idea of measurement here, these measure 8.5 inches by 5 3/4, so I've got all 4. Now I'm going to take the signatures out and put them somewhere safe, and I just want to work on the insides of these and tidy them up a bit because they're all just a little bit mucky. Now I've added a coat of gesso to all 4 inside covers, and that's for one to cover up the paint, but primarily just to add a bit more stability. I'm working on mixed media paper here, which is already quite thick, but the gesso will just help to stiffen it and just give a bit more stability. And I'm using distress paints, which I'm adding with a brayer. These are the same colours that I used to decorate the front of the booklet. So I'm just trying to use the same colours that I think I've already used. Of course, it was over a year ago, so you know this is a bit of guesswork here. But I just want to try and tie it in with the cover, that's all. And I'm just adding this paint on with a brayer. I add some of the picket fence here just to, you know, try and lighten it slightly. And I do end up watering down the leftover paint on the palette and adding it as a slight wash, because I just felt that this was a little bit too patchy for the look that I was after. I've got a little bit of paint left on my palette, and so I've cut some 3 pieces of watercolour paper down to ATC size, and I'm just spraying that with water and just dabbing that leftover paint onto the watercolour paper. And I'm going to make some ATCs to tie in with the cover. And you can see that I'm getting a lovely dendritic pattern by dipping the watercolour paper into that paint in this way. My background is a bit darker than I perhaps wanted it to be, and so I'm adding a lighter shade of pink here. I'm using the same stencils that I used to create the front cover. This is just one of the Dylusions dot stencils. I know I said that I was going to use non-commercial stencils this month, but I think the exception is here because I need the inside cover to be cohesive with the outside. So just dotting on some of that, I think it's Sponge Sugar distress paint here. Giving that a quick dry before coming in then with a very, very pale blue distress paint. And again, I'm using a lighter colour than I'd used on the outside of the cover, just to sort of try and add a bit of brightness to that rather dark background. And the end result just turns out beautifully. I'm just really happy with the way that this ends up looking. And this is a Creative Expressions mini dot stencil here that I'm using. I love these Creative Expressions mini stencils. They're just very, very easy to use and very versatile too. And just, you know, dotting that around in lots of different places. Then doing the same with those ATCs. You can see that I'd already added some of the Sponge Sugar to the ATCs, and now I'm doing the same with that pale blue. You can use any paint for this. The only reason I'm using distress paint is because I'd used that on the original cover. You have to be careful with distress paint because it's much thinner in consistency to normal paints, and it can easily run underneath your stencil if you're not careful. And I use the Dylusions Jumbled Letter stencil on the outside, so I want to do the same on the inside cover. So I'm just randomly placing that on the page with Seedless Preserves, which is the darker of the distress paints that I'm using today. And again, just really trying not to overthink where I place these jumbled letters, but just trying to overlap and add lots of layered interest. I'd also used what's become my trademark, lots of bottle cap circles to the front cover. So I'm doing the same to the inside, picking up some of that blue that's on the outside cover as well, just to tie it all in. I'm using a larger circle to start off with, larger bottle cap, and then I add a smaller one as well. And I keep referring to the front cover just for placement and just to make sure that I end up with everything being nice and cohesive. And then of course adding some of those circles to these ATC backgrounds so that they tie in with the main page. And finally, just adding a few hash marks using a cut-off piece of key card, plastic store card, all around the page, which again I've added on the outside, and this just adds a little bit more brightness. Don't bother adding the hash marks to the ATCs because I just think that will make it a little bit too busy on such a small place. But you can see that I'm using one of those paintbrush lids just to add some white circles over the top of some of the circles that I've already got going on, and again it just really brightens those ATC backgrounds. I just love that. Dug out the stencil that I used for the cover of my booklets, and I'm going to add the smaller flower to these ATCs. Now this is a non-branded stencil, it's just one that I randomly picked up from a craft fair, so I can't tell you what it is, but you can do this, you know, with any kind of flower stencil, or even draw it on yourself. And I end up adding 2 layers of paint here. I add the first layer, give it a quick dry, and then I add a second coat as well, just because it's not quite as bright as I would like it to be. So just lining that stencil back up and going over with another coat of paint, and you'll see in a minute that it really does brighten that flower and just make it stand out more against the background. There we go, comparing the difference. I added the stems of the flowers using a black Sharpie marker. I just forgot to press the record button, and I'm just going around the flowers here with some loose scribbly lines using a fine micron pen, and I just want to, you know, give the outside just a bit of detail, make it stand out more, but I'm really doing this in a very loose and scribbly fashion. And you all know how I like to add a border, so adding my usual black archival ink and a nice thick layer which just really frames those ATCs. Then I want to add a leaf, and I've hand cut this. I've made a custom stamp out of kids fun foam. The leaves I had in my stash were just far too big, and so I just used some kids craft foam, as I say, just cut it down to the size that I wanted it. I've glued a couple of layers together and attached it to a plastic room key card, and now I'm just outlining this with loose scribbly lines again using that black micron pen. I can't resist reaching for the white Posca paint pen to add a few doodles, so adding some scribbly lines to the stem and a few dots to the leaves. So here's my finished cover and ATCs, and I just love how this has turned out. So let me just show you. That's the outside of the booklet, the original piece that I started out with, and then this is the inside, and I just think it's transformed. I think by the time I've added my signature, it would just be a beautiful gift for somebody. And here's the ATCs that I created using the leftover paint. Now I forgot to mention in the video that I used Amsterdam acrylic in sky blue light to stencil on the flowers, for the reason being that the distress paint is quite translucent and very runny in consistency, and so I used a more heavy bodied acrylic, which the Amsterdam is, just to avoid any seepage underneath the stencil. And looking at it, I think that's the original paint that I used for the cover. And you can see as well that I've added a border using archival ink, which has covered up any of the gesso that just seeped onto the the front. You just can't avoid that. But you know, now the seepage just looks as if it was always meant to be part of the background. So I'm going to be back with a part 2 showing how I add a very simple signature to my page. And I also want to do a show and tell with what I end up doing with these 3 pages. I'm not going to do a full video because, you know, what I do to the inside of these will be very similar to how I've done this. So, you know, I don't want to bore the pants off everybody. But I thought you might like to see a show and tell. So I'll be back in a couple of days, as I say, with, you know, everything all completely finished. But these are my 3 ATCs and I just think they work beautifully. And wouldn't that make a gorgeous journal page? So you can see that I've just added some Tim Holtz chit chat words, soulful, cherish and dream, and that's it for the time being. So if you like that, I would really appreciate a thumbs up, because as I always say, it just lets YouTube know that you like what I'm doing. And let me know what you think in the comments below. And so I'll be back, as I say, with part 2 in a couple of days. But take care everyone, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye for now.